Hey everybody, and welcome to T&M Coaching Unplugged podcast and Zoran Todorovic Interconnected. This space where you elevate your heart, your mind, your soul to the next level of itself. It's the space when you come to get inspired, to learn new things, to understand certain things about yourself, and then to take certain learnings that you can bring back into your life, into your work, into your families, and grow further. So I'm really grateful for everybody who is coming every week to listen to our podcast. It's really lovely to see you, to your likes, your comments. We always enjoy our interaction with our community. Today, I have my wonderful colleague, Justine Williamson, joining us. She's an amazing coach. You know, she is somebody who comes from the corporate experience. She has been working with the big global organizations in different senior roles, anything from the HR to corporate responsibility, to marketing, to regulatory affairs. You know, she has the different positions within those organizations. She also has the science PhD, so she's a little bit scientific and has a strong mind, as we said. And then, you know, as she was kind of working through her corporate life, she came to experience coaching for herself. And then she also hired coaches for her team. And then she understood the benefits, the potential that coaching can offer. And that whole journey inspired her to become coach herself. And back in 2016, she has certified herself as a coach. And nowadays she's associate certified coach as well. As coach, Justine combines her corporate leadership experience, which is absolutely wonderful to have when we coach businesses, when we coach organizations. You know, she has been there, done that. She's also naturally warm, very passionate about coaching, and very passionate about motivation and development of others. Yes, so it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful conversation with Justine. Welcome.
Thank you, Zoran. Such a very kind, nice introduction. Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about something really relevant and important to a lot of our business audience, to the people who are listening us from corporations. And this is, you know, transitions. You know, you and I, we had already Instagram Live earlier this week. We already opened the topic of transition, but what I would love to start with is this very common transition that people are facing in the organizations when they move from leading self to leading others. So let's look into that. Let's look into the nature of that transition. How can we coach? How can we support? What is necessary for us to do as coaches and employees to manage this transition successfully?
Yeah, thanks, Zoran. It's an interesting transition going from managing self to managing others. And it's probably one of the biggest transitions that some can go through in their corporate careers, because often the skills that we had to manage self, skills that we used to get those jobs to manage self, are not necessarily exactly the same skills we need for managing others. And so sometimes it's a bit of a shock to the system when we suddenly have to change our skill set, when we've been very good at getting results, being proficient through our own doing, and then having to rely on others. So often when I'm working with clients, it's helping them work on ways they can transition through that, they can help others, they can change their own view of what the skills they need to let them progress. It's very interesting because I think what we find a lot is when we're looking at these the skill changes, often the skills we had to get our jobs can be very IQ based. They can be very based on hard skills, things we've learned in our education, things, our qualification, our experience. And when we're looking at leading others or managing others, there are a whole different set of skills that are equally as important, and arguably, and we can get into that a little bit when we talk about it, more important. So we're sort of talking on the EQ side versus the IQ side, and this is a lot of what we deal with. So when a client is coming to me and is for the first time needing to lead others, it's one of the important things to understand is, you know, how do they feel about their ability to communicate with others, their ability to embrace their emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, as we say, is quite key. It's one of these things that we actually all have to some degree.
Yeah.
I think it's one of these things that that has grown more important over the past 2 decades, in particular in the workplace. And researchers, studies have shown that your ability to harness your emotional intelligence can really dictate how well you can perform as a leader, potentially more so than the IQ. I love that there's an expression that says, the IQ can land you your job, but lack of EQ can get you fired from it.
Exactly.
And we see that a lot when we're looking at people moving into roles where they're having to use EQ and manage others. So in terms of how would we deal with someone who's moving into those roles, how do we coach them? It's very much getting them to understand, okay, what are the differences? What do I need to let go? Okay, what I was good at before is one thing, but what do I need to move to become a good leader? And so one of the main things, or there's a few things that we can focus on. It's how do we create an effective team? How do we delegate? How do we build trust? Various things that we can start looking at to help someone transition to those new roles. So, for instance, if we're looking at delegation, delegation, when you're managing yourself, you just do it all yourself. And we're very good at that. It's in our control. We feel very comfortable with what we can do ourselves. And when we're leading others, the transition, it's one of the biggest steps, is to be able to understand how to delegate effectively. Okay. And there are a few blockers for delegation. Yes. I remember when I was managing my own teams for the first time, delegation always feels sometimes like a dirty word. It feels like I'm getting others to do my dirty work. I'm too lazy. Why? I'm getting others to do it. And it doesn't feel comfortable for a lot of people. So we do really need to understand the importance of delegation and how it's not only helping us free up our time to do the things we need to do as leaders, as managers, but it's also developing those within our teams. It's also building trust. So just being able to do the delegation part is actually a really core part of transitioning from managing self to managing others.
Yeah. So, absolutely. And I think that that delegation, you said something that when we start, it feels like we're dumping something onto somebody else. When the true nature of delegation in that transition, it's developing and growing others through assigning them tasks that they need to take in order for them to be able to reach the next level of their performance or skill set or competence.
Absolutely. And often it's one of these things that people struggle with because they feel, well, there's a few reasons. They feel perhaps that they are better at doing it themselves, so are less likely to want to hand it over.
Yeah. I'm guilty of that.
I think we've all been guilty of that. They feel that perhaps their team has too much work, so they feel uncomfortable handing what they see as more work over to them. Or they feel, and this happens a lot, that part of their job they really used to enjoy. That's the bit they feel confident at. That's the bit that's in my comfort zone. And now I'm over here transitioning to be a leader. I'm having to let go of those pieces. And I kind of don't really want to because, I'm good at that. And I'm not so sure about this piece over here. So we work with our clients to work out, okay, what's going to stop you from delegating? And then helping them understand the benefits of delegating for themselves, for their teams, but for everyone. It's a win-win. It's a really big part of building trust between, you as a manager or as a leader and your team.
Absolutely. And I think this is also psychological transition on a certain level. You mentioned something that I know for myself when I was leading teams like yourself in the big organizations. What really made me successful was something that I was really good at as an individual contributor. I was skillful, for example, in managing project, or I was skillful in creating reports by myself, doing the research. And I really loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. And everybody around appreciated me for that skill set or competence or passion. And now I'm in a position when I should not do this any longer. I should give this to somebody else, all right?
Yeah.
And I should be managing and leading them to do that work that I really enjoy doing. So in that psychological transition, we all struggle. I think that it's so important to mention this. We all struggle to let go, right? Because
Yes.
who are we
Yes.
if we don't have this any longer, right?
Yes. And I think it very much, you're totally right. So what it comes down to is a lot of the things we were good at before were very tangible, very quantifiable. We can measure the success of those things. We can measure the success of finishing a report, finishing a project.
Yes.
But as a leader, motivating others, developing others, inspiring others,
Exactly.
things are much less tangible. And, we're very much, our whole school systems are very much set up to, challenge us along the IQ, along the tangible way of qualifying ourselves. And so then you move to this less tangible way of leading and managing people. You don't know often if you've done a good job at the end of the day. You don't have a nice shiny report. You don't have a finished project.
Exactly.
That tells you, yes, I've done well. So as I say, this first transition where you're used to managing self and then coming up to managing others, that's one of the hardest things I think people find is where do they get the pat on the back they need? Where do they get the tangible outcome that shows that they've been successful? And that's really uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I remember one of my first managers, when I was myself step into that position in my KPIs, I used to have a very specific, very tangible, very measurable objectives. I was really motivated because it was, as you said before, within my control. And then suddenly I was leading others. And I remember first time we discussed these KPIs, he told me, well, one of your KPIs is success of your team. And I was like, okay, but how do I measure that? How do I make sure my team is successful? He says, yeah, it's a collective KPI. It's a joint KPI. And your role is to make sure they succeed within project XYZ. So you're measured on your leadership skills. Actually, you're measured on your ability to motivate others. Actually, you're measured on your ability to create trust, to create winning teams, to create motivation, inspiration. And I remember, at that moment, I was like, how am I going to do this, right? And I think that's the question that everybody asks, when they put themselves in that position.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned it there. It's very much about building that trust, within the teams. It's about allowing that sort of handing over a responsibility for things that you were very precious and protective of before to others, which, as we say, develops them and also allows you to free up your time. And I think that's a big thing that everyone I hear, everyone in the workplace today feels overstressed, overworked. We all have so much going on. So how we manage our time, especially as leaders, is incredibly important. And as a leader or as a manager, what's your value add? You need to be getting your team to do all the things that they can do. And then you need to be focusing on the things that you alone should be doing. And it's being very clear, having clarity around what those are for you will help you realize which pieces you really do need to be letting go of and which pieces you should be focusing on. And I know when we're doing the T&M leadership training, it's a really interesting exercise when we take managers and leaders through that thought process and we say, what would you like to have more time to do if you had all the time to do it? And they understand they want to be spending the time strategic thinking. They want to be spending the time developing the teams developing themselves and building relationships, which are the important things that leaders should be doing. But if you've got your head down, if you are still doing all the reports and the bits and pieces that you really enjoyed doing before, you're not doing your job as a leader.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have time to do it. It's this time application. You're absolutely right. I talk to people like yourself, coach people all the time. And the time issue is something that is always relevant. So part of that planning and the transition is understanding, where do I put my time? What is the time application of my work as a leader? and what I should stop doing or what I should do more of, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it's a good exercise for people to go through, which is this prioritization of time. Because everyone will have a to-do list that will go on infinitely. As a leader, as a manager, it's your responsibility to help your team prioritize that list for them, but also to be quite strict to prioritize your own time. Because if you are not prioritizing your own time well, it's very difficult then to prioritize your team's time.
Exactly. I think that the setting priorities and supporting people to set priorities in that transition as well. And you being clear as a leader, what is the most important thing?
Yes.
What is the most important? What is the bottom line here? And I think in this agile new way of working, especially in the last 3 to 6 years, when the things are changing more rapidly than they have been changing before, we have to keep on being agile and reprioritizing all the time. So that means when you're in the transition of leading others, that needs to be something that you do really, really well. Otherwise, the team will suffer, the motivation will go down, the business will be lost. There will be consequences of us not being able to be agile like that.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important point. And I think, as you say, this post-COVID world, things seem to have sped up even more. And so this ability to be agile, this ability to be able to feel comfortable to drop things. And as a leader, it's often important, as you say, to prioritize your team. But as a leader, you're often needing to prioritize upwards as well. You need to manage upwards as well, as unless you're the CEO, everyone has a boss. So, and most important thing to ensure that your team has clear structure, clarity over what it's doing is to make sure that you have clear structure and clarity around what you're doing. And if you're not getting that, then you need to be managing up. So as a leader, that's an important transition as well, is to understand that it's not just about leading your team. It's about ensuring that you are getting the clarity you need to be able to do the job that you've got. And so that's, sending those conversations both up and down and becoming comfortable with going to our managers, our leaders, and asking for the support and the prioritization that we need to, and the clarity that we need to.
Yeah. Let me ask you one personal question, ask myself as well, I think, because audience always likes, personal questions, because we're talking a lot what is necessary, for somebody to be able to move through that transition and really step into that role. When you reflect back into your life, to your business experience, and your corporate experience, when was the moment when you were able to make this transition fully and start enjoying it? Can you recall that moment? What happened when you were kind of moving from leading self to leading others, having teams, having responsibility, managing up, managing down, finding your way within this new role, and then something happened and you start enjoying, okay, now I really enjoy this. Now this is becoming a little bit fun. It's not only tedious or challenging in a way. So what happened with you? And I'll share mine as well.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I love the way you said when it becomes fun, because I think that is work. We're in work, vast majority of our lives. So for me, I think work should be fun. It should be something that's enjoyable. So when you're transitioning into a new role, it is an incredibly stressful time for people. And, the fun factor can drop off. It can absolutely drop off. And I know myself when I first moved into a sort of leadership role like that, you are plagued by the self-doubt. And early on in my career, I was very much thinking I needed to do everything perfectly. I needed to get everything right all the time. I didn't give myself a chance to grow. I just thought I had to hit the ground running, which puts an enormous amount of pressure.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning, I was given coach during my career, and that coach at that point in time really helped me see, okay, you don't need to get this perfectly right from day one. That's not a good expectation of yourself. No one's expecting that of you. So I think once I started to manage my own expectations of what I should be like as a leader, once I started to understand I have a great team around me who are not there to trip me up, they are there to support me and want me to do well, and they want us as a team to do well. Once I started to make that transition mentally, that I don't have to be perfect. I have a great team. My responsibility is to ensure this really great team can perform. That's, I think, was one of the key moments when I realized, okay, I don't have to hold all of this myself, and having that space to let go and rely on others, which is a big thing.
Exactly. And I think that you mentioned something really important that everybody's struggling. I struggle with that as well. That perfection, everything needs to be perfect, especially if you're somebody who's responsible, and then you get in the position and you want to do well and you feel responsibility for yourself and everybody else, and you have high expectations of your performance.
Yes.
And if you're unlucky, that your manager or your boss will have even higher expectations of you, because sometimes people might tell you, you're so gifted, you're so talented, this is great thing for your job. Wow, well done, And then more and more expectations piles up, and then people end up like, wow, I need to do all of this perfectly. So I think I'm very grateful that you're mentioning that we need to let go of that. The imperfections of leadership, the imperfections of human relationships is always there. So if you relax into it, it becomes much easier to sit back into that transition and then really enjoy having the team, enjoy, working through others, enjoy working behind the scenes and not getting instantaneous gratification of dopamine rush if somebody tells you, well done, because we're all conditioned on a certain level. We need that feedback, especially within the organizational structure, when people are not seen enough, when somebody tells us, well done you, and now we're in a position that, well done your team, what about me? You know what I mean? So we have to be at ease with all of that and really start enjoying working through and with others to accomplish goals.
Absolutely. And you had the same experience, did you, when you first transitioned that way?
Same. I'm similar to you. I was overachiever. I was really, high expectations towards myself, really successful, and I really wanted to do well, but I was overwhelmed. And I was pretending that I was not overwhelmed. I was playing the game, I can do everything. And I was overworking consistently. I remember when I would step into my manager's role, I was working instead of 8 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours, weekends. I was just overworking, and I was like, something is wrong here. I'm promoted. I should work less, and I'm working more. I should have team working around me, and now like just paddling. And then a similar situation, I had mentor, I didn't have coach at that time. And, he asked me straightforward, when are you going to drop this overachiever syndrome that you have of you being perfect and doing everything to that extent? I didn't even know I had it. I said, what is this overachiever syndrome? What are you talking about? And then I became much more mindful and understood my psychology. And then I was able to really start enjoying the team. That was the one. And the other one was that I was challenged by that mentor to really start seeing my role and the success of my role through others. So the others, the team, was much more important than I was at that moment in time. So it's a humbling experience to let go of your ego, right?
Very much. That you use the E word, which is very important when we're dealing with managers moving into leaders, and really important shift as well.
Yeah, just to relax, to let go of my ego, to be more humble, and then to start enjoying and see that joy, because I love fun and joy, see the joy when other people succeed, you know? Yeah.
No, and that's the reward. But it is difficult for people, as you say, because we are pre-programmed to, be successful and show all our whistles and bells and show how great we are all the time. And we are pre-programmed to need that gratification, that pat on the back. So it does, as you say, it takes a little bit of psychological, work to shift your brain into thinking, okay, this is now a different phase for me. I don't need to be the center of attention. I don't need to have,
prove something to anybody. Personally.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that EQ, it's very important in this transition. So let's unpack a little bit EQ. I love EQ, emotional intelligence. I like yourself. I think this is something that we all need to have more of. We all need to understand what that EQ really means for us, and how do we unlock that level of intelligence in ourselves to be able to relate to people in a better way, to be able to empower people in a most beautiful way. And I think, like you, the EQ is essential in this transition. The unlocking, the bringing it up, living it, being it, much more than, IQ instructing, telling people what to do, organizing, planning. I think that EQ element is there. So what would you say on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it is a really interesting sort of concept that has not been around that long. As we said, this whole, I guess it's only since the late 90s when, was it Dan Goleman published his emotional intelligence book that was sort of the seminal thing that made us all understand that there's more to being a leader than, just having, the most experience or, the one who can shout the loudest. And then I think this has been followed up by countless studies that have demonstrated that your EQ, your emotional quotient, your ability to harness your emotional intelligence is more of an indicator for success than IQ. So, but what's interesting is it's taken us, I think, a long time for leaders to maybe catch up with the research. There seems to be a very long lag, and it's only sort of really quite more recently that leadership style, I think, is starting to change, and people are appreciating that the EQ side in leaders is incredibly important. I mean, I think we all loved Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, and I think she was an absolutely beautiful version, wonderful version that demonstrated how a leader with incredibly high emotional intelligence was still able to be strong. She was able to, perform incredibly well under quite extreme circumstances. She had to perform during COVID. She had to perform during, she had a mass shooting to deal with. She had the volcano to deal with. But as a progressive leader who very much used her emotional intelligence, she came across as a leader who was kind, had empathy, was able to communicate all these skills that are really important. She was able to connect with people. And it was interesting because this then showed, probably for the first time on a political stage, how you can be a strong, successful leader and have EQ as a main part of your backbone.
Exactly. I always remember one of my leaders told me, leaders set the emotional tone. Leaders are the ones who are creating this feeling within the team, and the emotions that people feel within the team is what people remember. When they leave the organization, they don't talk about the projects. They talk about how was I feeling in this organization, and how was I feeling being led by that leader. So for me, that what you mentioned, the ability for us to activate a deeper level of compassion, to really feel and understand other people, for us to be able to empathize, as you said, which is the second quality of EQ, being able to really look into somebody else and understand their perspective, because we're all different. I think the empathy comes from the space that you might be in this situation in a completely relaxed way, and I'd be hyper stressed out.
Yeah.
You will be asking me, why are you stressed out? We have enough time. We have 3 weeks to complete this project. I will be, oh my God, we only have 3 weeks, because we're all different. So that ability to really empathize and appreciate diversity, I think it's super important, for leaders, right? And I would also add, for our consideration, it's this ability to self-regulate. For me, when I really tapped into my emotional intelligence as a leader, I was able to understand my emotions. I was able to understand what triggers me, what are the circumstances, situations, people, conversations that will get me like, angry, or, that will get me resentful, or that will get me disconnected, or that will get me, I don't care, I'm just going to just play along in this meeting, but actually I don't really care what they're talking about. So what happens with my emotional body, and what are my key triggers? And I really needed to look into that. I think the EQ, it's interesting because we need to spend some time in exploring ourselves, right?
Absolutely. And I think the definition of emotional intelligence is our ability to manage our own emotion, and then our ability to understand the emotional states of others. So if we are not, I'm never going to say in control of our own emotions, but having having more control over our emotions, understanding our emotions, as you say, understanding what triggers us, why it's triggering us. That once we've got that in place, then it's so much easier then to relate and understand the emotions of others. Exactly. But it does take, and it's funny, I think a lot of clients come to me and everyone wants a quick tool that will, kickstart them into having the emotional intelligence. And I mean, I've always done a lot of sport my whole life. So, physically fit, always exercising. And I totally understand that from a physical fitness point of view, you have to keep working, you have to constantly be, doing exercises. And it's exactly the same for your emotional intelligence, for your ability to manage your emotions, the ability to manage the inner talk, the self-talk, the stories, the narrative we have in our heads, because these are the things that cause our emotions. So it's not a case of there's a quick tool, I can flick it on. It's a case of you're actually having to exercise all the time. You have to keep practicing, changing how you think, acknowledging how you're feeling, understanding what's making you feel that way. And it's bit by bit, you become physically stronger after exercise. You become emotionally, mentally stronger by doing that.
Exactly. And I think that's an important thing, because it's not a quick fix. It's not spiritual bypass. It's not the emotional bypass. It's something that you need to invest into. But in this transition, what both you and I are saying is that is an essential skill, because if you bring your emotional intelligence up and if you unlock it, if you begin living it, then your relating to other people will become completely different, right? And then by nature, how you lead others by using your emotional intelligence is going to be even easier for them, easier for you, because you will have connection, right? And we're looking for that connection.
Absolutely. And it does become easier. And I think, it's one of these things, if it's too difficult for us to do, we don't want to do it. And I think that's one of the things when I'm working with my clients, it is actually relatively easy to do these little baby steps, that bit by bit. No one gets up and runs a marathon straight away. We start off by, doing little short distances bit by bit, and then we can run a marathon. And it's exactly the same with your emotional intelligence and your ability to control your emotions and to understand how you can change, reframe the stories and narratives in our heads that affect our emotion.
Exactly. Because we are in charge with that, the bottom line as well with emotional intelligence, we are the ones who are changing the narratives and the stories and in our head, and then we relate to others. It's nobody makes us feel in a certain way. We make ourselves feel in a certain way. There's this different. My manager, it's so disempowering. He makes me feel disempowered. It's about, okay, what disempowers you right now? How can you self-regulate to bring yourself back to power?
And it's interesting. A client I'm actually working with this week, and they are new into a leadership role, and the story, the inner dialogue in their head was, around I'm not a good enough leader. I'm not good enough at this. I'm going to be found out. That sort of that negative inner self-talk, and it was creating a huge amount of anxiety, feeling that they were flawed, feeling that they were going to be exposed. And then when we unpacked that a little bit and said, okay, how would it feel? What else could we say? And changing the narrative to, okay, I'm new into this role. They wouldn't have given me this role if I wasn't good enough to get the role. No one's expecting me to be perfect at this new role straight away. I have to take time to grow. I have to take time to learn. And switching that first story, but I'm not good enough, I'm going to be found out, but the more positive, the more realistic story, instantly you could just see when he switched that story around, it was this sigh of relief. It's like, yeah. And we can keep doing that all the time, just reframing those negative stories. And that's what we do a lot. Coaching is helping people see, okay, what's the reality here? What are the facts? What does that tell us? How can we change our story in our head to and manage our anxiety?
Exactly, and get people to hear themselves. What I found out that the power of coaching for me was I was able to hear myself thinking, and I was able to hear myself, what I was saying to myself as I was not in relationship with my inner dialogue. And most of people are not aware what is going on inside. But once when you're in the space of coaching or leadership development, you can hear, and therefore we can shift, right?
Yes.
And that, what you mentioned, that imposter syndrome, we're all struggling with. I don't know any human being that I met in my life, who doesn't have like this, like, oh my God, am I really good enough? Is somebody going to find that I'm really not?
Exactly. And I think, that it's one, I think the stats say 70% of people, adults, have suffered it at some stage. And I think the other 30% just haven't admitted to it.
Exactly.
Everyone does.
We all have it.
Absolutely.
And we have to have fun with this, And I think when we all understand it, we all have it, it's easier for all of us, because the nature of that imposter syndrome, it's only me, right? It's nobody else. It's only about me.
Yes. And I think, that's, again, the wonderful thing about coaching is because when clients come to coaching, sometimes it's the first time they've admitted out loud that they have this imposter syndrome. And it's absolutely normal. I don't know whether have you heard of a gentleman called Stephen Bartlett? He's on the Dragon's Den, the entrepreneur, the young guy on the Dragon's Den. And he has a beautiful way of reframing imposter syndrome as, when you have that feeling, you've got those butterflies in your stomach, you've got that fear, it's actually, those are the moments that are tremendous growth moments. And I think that's absolutely wonderful, because this is not abnormal. Imposter syndrome is not, I think we need to give it a new name, because even calling it a syndrome makes it sound negative. But these are just moments where we know that, we are about to learn, we're about to move into something new, which makes us nervous, yes, but actually that's a good thing, because we're going to grow. And so just trying to reframe that. So I really like the way he said, he's phrased it.
Beautiful. We're going to rename it to the growth moment. So we kind of close to our time today. It really goes quickly, this podcast and chats and the format. So, 40 minutes already passed. So we talked a lot about this transition, and we really hope that people will listen to this from a very multidimensional point of view, because we weaved in a lot of different bits and pieces that will support you or the people that in this transition from, leading self to leading others, and understanding what is necessary for you to really enjoy stepping into that role and making yourself at home, and really understanding that transition is always you moving from one point to another point, and it takes time, it takes energy. You need to be supported, you need to be loved, you need to be understood on a certain level, because we cannot just jump into it. It's not nature of our humanity. So how would you love to leave our audience with? Anything that you would love to share towards the end, any kind of spontaneous thing that comes to you that will help us wrap this conversation up from your point of view?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think it's when people are going through transitions, is really just be kind to yourself. Understand it's a growth process. It's not going to happen overnight. And share that anxiety with someone, whether it's a coach, whether it's a trusted colleague, because bottling that up is not going to do you any good. It's not going to do your team any good. So just enjoy it. Experience those butterflies. It's that tremendous growth moment when you're transitioning to being in a new role, in a new leader.
Exactly. And then reach out to Justine, reach out to me, reach out to any coach, reach out to support, reach out to your manager, get yourself support. Don't, we all think that we can do everything ourselves, and this part of the, being promoted and going through transition is something that other people believe in you. And then we get pushed into, I can do everything alone. I think that the analogy of every intelligent sports person has the coach throughout his career on the peaks and lows, and on the peak performance, and when they're really not performing that well, but there's somebody accompanying them throughout their life journey. And I think we all need that support, especially in transition. So if you feel that you need support, just reach and have support. And once again, Justine, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience. It was joy and pleasure to talk to you today, and I hope everybody else enjoyed. And again, thank you so much for coming and listening to us week after week. We're really grateful for your presence as well. Justine, bye for now.
Thank you for having me. Cheers. Bye-bye.